Here there's more pictures. Here at the quarry where they have been moved from, there are 2 more blocks of rock cut out, which are weighing respectively, is it 1,000 and 1,100 tons, but which were never moved. So seemingly maybe that was even too much for those who could move 800 tons to move 1,100 tons. Or who knows? Who knows? By the way, just a comparison, a Boeing 747 weighs something like 350 tons. So someone in the, no one knows, in the past were lifting 2.5 Boeings, seemingly in the Stone Age, without any modern equipment. That was something also I was when I spoke to this crane company. It turned out that actually nowadays that there are cranes that actually can lift. Actually in China now they have cranes that can lift 20,000 tons. So and they exceeded the capacity quite much over the last year, because actually in 1970, at that time the biggest cranes on the planet could lift 400 tons. So actually until 1970 there were no cranes on this planet which could lift 800 tons. We have it now. But the engineer spoke with it to lift this without modern equipment. He couldn't even speculate how to do that. Archaeologists are speculating that it took 40,000 people to do it. But how you logistically, organize 40,000 people, and also you have to remember that the whole terrain that you move these enormous heavy stones across has to be completely, it has to be forstärket, funderet. It has to be really, strengthened. Otherwise, the whole thing just simply sinks into the ground. So, but there's no evidence, and there's no trace of the land between the quarry and where the building is has been any strengthened or anything like that. There's no evidence of that. So, what kind of culture? Was it a primitive Stone Age culture that was able to move rocks like that? Or was it actually an advanced culture as described in the Vedic literature? And you find these all over the world evident. These kind of relics from a past culture which defy common sense explanation. And they are actually vastly older than most historians and archaeologists will admit. For example, actually I just have a couple more pictures of just to admire these stones. I don't know if you see there's one man here, just to give you a perspective. And as I said, there are many, of course, thousands of similar structures all over the world. Famous are, of course, Egypt, the pyramids, and a lot could be said about that. I just for mention, I'm just going to focus a little on the Sphinx. This is actually the largest sculpture anywhere on the planet. It's a whole one-piece rock mountain was carved out as in the shape of a lion. Probably it also had a lion head, but at a later age some carved out a pharaoh's head, or probably was a lion's head originally. And given historians, and that you can read in books, were dated to something like 4,000 years old or something like that. However, there are problems with that date actually. The problem was that it was shown that in the 90s, in the beginning of the 1990s, 2 American geologists got permission to analyze and investigate the Sphinx, and they discovered that the Sphinx is actually it's eroded. It's a very old structure, so it's eroded, but it's eroded by water. It's eroded by water. It's clearly, the rocks can be eroded by water, and they can be eroded by wind and sand. But if they're eroded by wind and sand, then it's eroded horizontally, and if it's torrents of rain that are pouring down on the rocks for thousands of years, then the erosion becomes vertical. And the Sphinx has vertical erosion marks. So actually, they conclude it was eroded by water, and that has implications because there has not been rains like that in that area for at least 6,000 years. You have to actually go back something like 9,000 BC or 10,000 BC to find rains of that kind in that area, and the erosion on the strings must have taken thousands of years to bring to the stage where it is now. The paper and this investigation was presented 1 year, I think it was in '92, at the American Geological Association, and all the geologists they were applauding, nice job, and then they're waiting for what will the archaeologists respond to this now, and they thought the archaeologists must have a good reply, and then but the leading archaeologist, his reply was that this is not possible. Simply not possible, because we have no evidence of a civilization existing at that time, so therefore it cannot be that old. Of course, the geologist replied to that, this is not our problem. Rather, how could you miss that? There is evidence, it is that old. How could you miss it? And how can you claim there is no, you have the evidence right in front. It's like not seeing the forest for trees. You have a structure that must be that old. And actually also, within the last 10-15 years, things are actually moving. And they discovered structures of a similar magnitude, which are just as old. If we go to Turkey, very famous archaeological site has been excavated where actually it's called Göbekli Tape, and there some German archaeologists had actually uncovered a very great stone structure with magnificent carvings that date something like I think that it's 12,000 years old, similar to the claimed age of the Sphinx by these geologists. And here's a German. Something Smith, I think, was his name. I forgot. But here's, just to give you an idea what is, some of these structures that have been found there. So actually, things are moving there. And it looks like in the past, actually, there were, now even mainstream archaeologists are starting to accept there were some very advanced stone cutters in like 12,000 years ago. And of course, there's so much evidence that points to a much larger age for many of the structures all over the world. For example, the South American monuments of Machu Picchu and Tiahuanaco and so on. There's a lot of that actually indicates they're much vastly older than normally been accepted. Which once again brings us to a question about what about America? Vedic culture in America, because if there were a worldwide Vedic culture at one point, that means also it must have been in America. I remember when I started looking into this for a couple of years ago, I thought this is going to be the most difficult thing to establish. And some also think like that, like we have our own Devanatha Swami. Many of you know him. He wrote a book on this topic and published it, was it 10 years ago or something like that, with a lot of information, and I'm drawing on his book also. But amazing, he doesn't even discuss America. So I conclude it must be quite difficult to establish a Vedic connection to America. I was surprised that actually it turns out that might actually be the easiest to establish of all. Might actually be the easiest to establish of all. Of course, the standard theory, as you can read in history books, is that the great cultures from prehistorical cultures found in the world arose independently. You had cultures in India, in Egypt, in China, and of course the first ones in Mesopotamia or Sumer, and which are supposed to be the oldest of all, And then in America, Central America, South American cultures also arose independently. Humans came to the American continents something like 12,000 years ago, and they came to America from Siberia into Alaska, because at that time these two continents were connected at the Bering Strait. That's standard, as a standard theory. So, but actually it turns out that it might not be the complete story we heard there. For example, and I mean there's so much evidence actually, I'm completely amazed by how much evidence is. Here's one, I don't know if you can read it, but this is the gentleman here to the right was India's best Vastu architect, Ganapati Stapati, who designs hundreds and thousands of Vedic temples and also statues. I know he makes incredible statues of Hanuman and so on. And he, standard, really traditional Vedic architect. So in the 1995, he visited South America. It's something that he wanted to do for many, many years. And he visited some of the great monuments, such as Machu Picchu, and also some Mayan sites at Yucatan. And he was measuring buildings there. And he found that actually Machu Picchu is built according to Vastu. It's built according to Vastu. There are very precise dimensions for Vastu, proportions between walls, length, breadth of a building, height, inclination of roofs, windows, and it says here, column sizes, wall thicknesses, and so on. All completely conform to the principles and guidelines as described in the Vastu Shastras of India. Same for many of the Mayan sites. They actually follow Vastu. And also the building techniques, mortar was being used to put between bricks, which is a standard Vastu building technique. It's found in Americas too. And and he found so many examples that it's clearly they were connected. Must have been the same culture. And many actually are also, there are historians. I found out then that actually turns out there are many historians, but there are some, and it's a minority of historians, and they're marginalized, but they are still standard mainstream historians who are claiming actually the Central American cultures came from Southeast Asia, and they were connected not via Siberia, Alaska, but simply across the Pacific Ocean. Someone might say, but how could they in the 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 years ago sail across the Pacific Ocean? But actually, they could. We have records of ships 2,000 years ago in India and Southeast Asia, and Vedic culture, that were better than the ships Columbus used to cross the Atlantic. Actually, you have to get into the 1700s before Europe reaches the level of seamanship and shipbuilding that was there in India 2,000, 3,000 years ago. That's recorded. And these ships could definitely sail across the Pacific. And there's much evidence actually they did. So actually they were connected. Could have also been connected by the Himalayas and so on. We leave that out. They seem like they could definitely be connected, and there's a lot of evidence they actually were. And there's so many similarities actually if you start looking at the Central American, South American cultures and Vedic culture. For example, a lot of architecture is very, very similar. To the left is some South Indian temples, and these are structures from Yucatan. They're very, very similar. There's a board game called Pachisi. I never played it, but that's one of the most striking examples. Pachisi found in India, and when the Europeans came to Mexico first Europeans, they found that the Mexicans were playing Paitoli the same game. So it must be the same culture. It had the same similar game. Another example is that on many American structures and temples, you found figures of elephant heads. Now there's never been elephants on the American. I mean, there were mammoths in Alaska, but in Central America, South America, there has never been elephants. But still, many temples have heads of elephants. And so some of you seeing here. I think there was some more. No, these are different. And they're very clear. That's also one point. They're not African elephants, actually Indian elephants. African elephants have bigger ears and different shape of the head. These are Indian elephants, actually. And there's so much other evidence. There is a lot about the religions are actually very similar. A lot of mythology, the calendars are similar. And also, for example, here there is a drawing. I don't know if you can see, but I have to study it. It's actually a drawing of here you can see actually there are something that looks like a turtle, something that looks like a rope, a mountain, some beings pulling a rope. Looks like very much like the churning of the Middle Ocean. This is from illustration from Tristan, from the Aztecs, something like that. And here also there's another example. Sariputta pointed out, so this example is quite famous. There is you might say, a myth from the Sioux Indians. Is that correct pronounced? Sioux Indians, who have a myth that there are 4 ages. And by the way, this idea of 4 ages are found in traditions all over the world, even also here in the north. So the Sioux Indians have this of 4 ages: a golden, a silver, a copper, and an iron age. And there is a bison ox that in each age loses 1 leg. As of now, it's standing on 1 leg. So in that field, you can see the resemblance for the Bhagavatam story about Dharma, the bull, standing on now in Kali Yuga on 1 leg, and lost each one leg in each age. So actually, that's found in the Sioux Indians have this traditional myth. How can that be? It's so similar. Cannot be. And if you start studying myths all over the world, so-called myths, you see many similarities. Even in the north, on the Norse sagas like that. For example, you have a being called Surr, something like Surr, who is a very mystical creature who lives somewhere in the bottom of the universe. He gets angry. He emits fire, he destroys the universe, and he's very similar to Sankarshan, actually. There's so many similarities worldwide about this, again, and that can be investigated a lot. There's evidence for actually that must have been kind of, what was the explanation to find these similar items in traditions all over the world? One explanation, simple explanation, seems that at one point, they must have some kind of common source. They're too specific just to be, derived by chance. Too specific. If we, also one interesting top field nowadays is investigating constellations and stellar figurations given in traditional literatures, ancient literatures. Previously, it was not possible to actually say anything specific about them. That, for example, we know that it's a lot of solar eclipses, lunar eclipses, and constellations of stars and planets are actually given in the Mahabharata, in the Ramayana, and so on. But to verify and to establish when these dates actually, when these things actually happen used to be impossible. Not any longer. Now computers actually can calculate back, and a lot of interesting research has been done in that along that. For example, and this is now we're getting too technical, but there's a drawing of ecliptica, which is a little important in relation to the next. But I'll try to do it quickly, not to get too technical. But we're going to look at Mahabharata, and when Lord Krishna went on the peace mission to try to negotiate peace with the Kurus before the war actually did take place. Because what's interesting is there is a lot of constellation giving along for each day when Krishna goes on the peace mission, when he is in Hastinapur, when he again leaves Hastinapur accompanied by Karna. And there's so many omens, inauspicious omens, and they are all constellations in the sky. So, for example, it says here, Krishna's mission for peace is so important, there's from a number of events in reference to that mission are recorded. It says here, Krishna leaves for Hastinapur in the Maitri Muhurta in the month of Kartik on the day of Revati Nakshatra. I'm not going to get into it, but these refers to very specific stars and constellations in the sky. On the way he halts at a place called Vikastala and reaches Hastinapur on the day of Bharani Nakshatra, again very precise constellation. The meetings and discussion for peace go on till the day of Pushya Nakshatra, when the ordinary takes all offers of peace and war becomes imminent. Krishna leaves Hastinapur on the day of Uttara Palguni. Karna accompanies him in his chariot and has a long conversation with him. And during the conversation, Karna describes some omens he has seen that indicate a great harm to the Kuru family, which include the following. It says Shani, which means Satan, is afflicting Rohini. It's a star, the prominent star in Sagittarius, as far as I remember. Angarika, that's Mars, has performed a retrograde motion before reading Jesta. Mars sometimes moves backwards. Most of the time it moves with us, but sometimes it's seen move a little backwards, and then again. And here, Jesta, as far as I remember, is the star Antares. And so Mars is moving backwards at Antares. That's very, very specific. And then again moves prograde when it comes to Anuradha, which I don't remember the name of that. That's another star close to the star Antares. The moon had lost its luster on the full moon of Kartik. Here's a reference to a lunar eclipse just taking place, and a solar eclipse will appear next on a new moon day. Very, 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 very unusual constellation, because actually at this period when Karna, Karna is speaking to Krishna. Okay, 2 minutes, then we finish. And Karna, actually, it's you have 2 lunar eclipses and 1 solar eclipse within 1 month. It's a very unusual constellation, and and this can actually be calculated. So one professor, Narahari Acharya, professor of physics from Memphis, he actually calculated, and he found that just with all these different constellations, he found, let's see here, that the date of 3067 BC is the only date where all these constellations actually coincide with 2 lunar eclipses, 1 solar eclipse within 1 month, with Saturn in Rohini, with Mars making a retrograde movement in Antares. There's a very specific date when that happens, and that happens to coincide with the day when with a date, actually it's given for the age of Mahabharata and the Mahabharata war, the Kurukshetra war. So, I mean, again, there is good reason to think that actually we are talking about actual historical persons. Krishna actually did exist. He was on this planet. What is recorded about him is actually correct in the Mahabharata, Srimad Bhagavatam, and so on. And many scientists actually now are come to that conclusion. Yeah. So here are some of the dates. Krishna's departure from Singapore on September 26, 3007 BC. Lunar eclipse on September 29th. Krishna traveled to Karna on October the 8th, 3067 BC. Then a solar eclipse on October 14th, and Bhishma disappears on January 17th, all based on this calculation, which conforms nicely with the traditional dates are given. Yeah.
Could somebody switch on the light there in the corner? And first of all, thank you very much to Lalitanatha Prabhu. I hope that all you have very big brains and can accommodate all these figures here at 12 o'clock midnight, having fasted the whole day, but it's very exciting to have scientific proofs that the Vedic culture actually did exist. So now we will have a kirtan for 15 minutes. Oh, yes, I forgot that right now is the time. We have actually been waiting for that our dear Mr. Atria, the Indian ambassador, had promised to speak some words to enlighten all of us on the occasion of Krishna's Janmastami. And after the ambassador has spoken, then we will have our Gora midnight Krishna's appearance. So it's just 15 minutes to 12 now before Krishna appears. So let us give the words to the ambassador to say something on that occasion.
Hello.
Hari. We were all mesmerized by the previous talk. My appearances come like a bad dream to all of you. It is a happy occasion for all of us, all the divine souls, sisters and brothers who are gathered here. I and my wife Usha come here as devotees to share the joy of the joyous birthday of Lord Krishna in a short while, midnight of Janmastami. Our best wishes to all of you. May Lord Krishna grant all your wishes, give you the boons you have been seeking, but most importantly, may Lord Krishna give you the blessing, give all of us the blessing, that our hearts remain joined to the lotus feet of Lord Krishna, now and forever. Over my fairly long diplomatic career in all corners of the world, I and my family members have always been deeply touched by our interaction with International Society for Krishna Consciousness, ISKCON members. Your devotion is exemplary. Your dedication is exemplary. We all can learn from it. your humility is exemplary. In different corners of the world, starting from Africa where we served, in North America, in different parts of Asia, and in Europe, we have seen very wonderful examples of this everywhere around the world. This is a moment our heart bows in reverence